Once we get it open here, you'll see the welcome screen. Other things that you have worked on, you'll notice are here in this list. You can always just click on them, the ones that aren't grayed out anyway, and you can get right to them. But here we're going to go to new. And the first thing we need to do is call this project something and tell our computer where to put it. So I'd like you to follow this naming convention for all of your assignments. So I'm going to use my last name. So you use your last name, underscore, assign, underscore, 1. Simple. This tells me who it is, which assignment it is, pretty quick. I'm going to put mine. I'd like to put mine here on my desktop. So I put it over here where it's easy to find, and I'll click save, and you'll notice that it creates this folder. I've mentioned this before. So this is the file that we're looking at, but everything else in this general folder, these are all supporting files. Okay. First thing we need to do, learn how to add tracks, delete tracks, rename tracks. So let's do a couple of those things. Let's do all of that. First thing we'll do is go up to project. And let's go to create tracks. It's the second item in the project menu. And when that option comes up, it's going to ask you what track type, like what kind of track would you like to create. And we have all these tracks, right? We can mix and surround. We can do MIDI, mono, stereo, audio, all these things. So let's go ahead and choose a MIDI track. And then let's hit add. Let's hit add again. So we're going to choose 2 MIDI tracks, or we're going to create 2. Yes, we could have just simply changed the quantity here, right? This will get us 3 tracks, and that's okay. If we already know where we want this to go in terms of sound, so if we have a keyboard or any kind of thing in the outside world, it's going to show up here. And again, whatever's in my list will probably not be the same thing that's in your list. This represents the stuff that I have here in my own personal studio. You can also set a default patch, but this, right, isn't very helpful, because what is patch 77? I have no idea. It's going to be different for every single device. If you make a mistake, we don't want this one anymore, we can just hit delete. So here we have something. We're going to create 2 MIDI tracks. It doesn't really matter where we send them, and we're not going to worry about the patch. We're just going to click OK. And you'll notice that DP creates these 2 tracks. Now, before we move forward, I want you to look in the lower right corner. And you have a vertical and horizontal zoom section where you can get to plus and minus, right? You can zoom in. I would just generally zoom in all the way vertically. I would be very careful zooming in horizontally. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So now we have these 2 MIDI files, or these 2 MIDI tracks rather, pardon me. In the middle here, in the center of this, running vertically, is this line. You'll see this little tiny dot. So it's a handle. You can grab that and move this, if you only need to see a little bit or a bunch or whatever. If you use comments, probably a good idea to have those open. All you need to do is double click in the comments in order to open up that comment pane. So you can say, I don't know, something like that. And then that shows up over here. Keep notes on kinds of things that you're recording. Okay, so we've looked at adding. Let's look at renaming tracks. To rename a track, first you want to find the column that shows the track name, and that's here. And if you want to rearrange these columns, you can. You can put the track name, can be all the way over here if you want, or it can be over here. It doesn't matter. We'll find this first one. I'm going to hold the Option key on a Mac, which is the Alt key on a PC, and just click 1 time. And I'm just going to call this Drum Groove 1. And I'm going to hit Enter or Return. And now we've saved this name. If you need extra space, it should stretch. If not, we should be able to stretch it here. Same thing for MIDI 2. I'm going to hold down the Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, click 1 time, and I'm going to call this one Drums Groove 2, because 2 comes after 1. No other reason. Okay, so now we've opened a new file, we've saved a new file, or at least created a place to save it to. We have added 2 tracks, we have renamed 2 tracks, and we've even added some comments. Okay. And again, we can rearrange this a little bit if we need to, if we want more room over here. Probably what I would recommend is doing something like this, and then you can pull this all the way over. Something like that. But just know that basically what you look at is fairly customizable. All right, the next thing we need to do is learn how to delete tracks. We've learned how to create them. We need to learn how to delete them. So we can do this either one at a time or en masse. So if I wanted to select just one, I can select the name, find Drum Groove 1, and then I can just delete that one file. If I want to delete both of these because they're next to each other, I can just hold the Shift key down and select, and it will grab a range. Or you should be able to hold the Command key and select multiple tracks that aren't next to each other. But you can do it one at a time, whatever. So go here and select Drum Groove 2. You're going to go up to Project, and about 5 things down in the list, you'll see Delete Tracks. You'll notice that Delete Tracks does not have a keyboard shortcut, and that's intentional, because DP does not want you to accidentally delete your work. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Delete Tracks. It doesn't even ask me to confirm, and there it is. What if I didn't want to delete that one? Like, what if, oops, I meant to delete the other one? Well, on the Mac, you can hold down the Command and hit Z. On the PC, you can hold down Control and hit Z, and that will undo, right? And so that's here. You do have an undo history, so you can get back several things that you did like 8 movements ago or 8 edits ago and just undo that thing. So pretty intelligent tool. So let's go ahead and delete both of these tracks. So I'm going to select one, hold the Shift key, select the other, or click on the other, go up to my project menu, choose Delete Tracks, and here I am at a fresh, clean file once again, but not saved. So one thing I would recommend that you do all the time, get in the habit of it, is holding down the Command key and hitting S if you're on a Mac, or holding down Control and hit S as in save. Do it all the time. Just do it all the time. Get out of the habit of doing work, analyzing the work, deciding if you like the work, then saving the work, right? Do the work, save the work, do the work, save the work. When you're done doing the work, you can go back and analyze the work. Always save your work. Okay, so we've added tracks, we've selected tracks, we've deleted tracks, we've named tracks. Let's go ahead and move on, and let's add one more track. We're going to do this in a little different way. Let's go up to Project, and this time we're going to add a track, but we're not going to use Create Tracks. We're going to use Add Track. It's no different. You can get to the same outcome, but there's always more than one way to do things. This is sort of the way that I like to do it through Add Track. So what I want to do is add a track where we can enter information for our hi-hat, which means I need a MIDI track to enter that MIDI information into, but then I need an instrument track that will allow me to send that MIDI information to that instrument. So I'm going to choose Instruments with Options, and I'll get a little window that comes up and says, hey, what do you want to, how many of these do you want to make? Where do you want to assign it? And for my case, I don't need to change anything. I'm just going to click OK. And what you'll notice is that DP actually creates 2 tracks, a pair of tracks, and these 2 tracks are linked together. You'll notice that the instrument track does not have a little red dot here, but the MIDI track does. So does the conductor track. And that is the record enable for that particular track. So if I want to record MIDI information, the next time I hit record and play, I need to make sure that whichever track I want to record to is enabled. And it's enabled as long as you see that red dot. You cannot record to an instrument because that's like recording to a saxophone, right? Think of it like that. That's not really how it works. You're going to record your MIDI data to a MIDI track. That MIDI track is going to then send that data to an instrument. It just happens that all of that stuff is built into this one little window. Okay. Let's go ahead and rename our tracks. And so, oops, pardon me. Okay. Hold down the Option, hit that track name, and I'm going to call this hi-hat. And then what is this instrument? Don't think about this as being a hi-hat instrument. We're going to call this drums for now, and you'll see why in just a second. So now we have these two tracks. We have an instrument that's going to make the sound, and then we have a MIDI track that's going to generate the data that sends to the instrument so that it can, in fact, make the sound. And you'll notice the difference here between these two tracks, right? So if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that this icon has a little person waving a hand. That's the conductor. The music note is always going to be a MIDI track. This little square looking thing, not the greatest icon, but it's the instrument icon. And anytime that you see that, it tells you immediately what type of information or data would be on this track. The other way you can kind of tell is by looking at the output. Where is this thing headed to? And for this, it's wanting to know really which speakers or which amplifier, how do you want to hear this saxophone, right? Or this drum, this whatever this instrument is. And in my case, I'm just choosing the built-in speakers on my MacBook Pro. Okay, zoom back out. Now, next thing we want to do is we want to record MIDI to our actual hi-hat track. Normally, we would set a default patch at this point, and I've talked a little bit about this as being the first patch or the first sound on a track. If we were in the studio, in the lab at school, this would for sure be important because you'd be surrounded by a bunch of hardware. It's not necessarily important here. But what we do need to do is we need to make sure we know which slot in our drum sampler the hi-hat is loaded to. So when I double click the title, or the name rather, the track name, I get this little window up. And right now this is my instrument because I haven't told DP what type of instrument. I mean, I've named it drums, but I haven't told it which instrument I want. So here in this blank little bar, I'm going to click, and you'll notice a window pops up, an instrument select window. Yours will look very different. I have a ton of hardware and software, so I have a bunch of crap in here. But you want to find Motu, it should already be selected, and these all of us will have. And so I'm going to mostly focus on using these. If you already have a DAW, you already have plugins, you already have something that you like that you use, knock yourself out, totally cool with me. For the rest of us though, we will use Model 12 for this. So I'm going to select Model 12, click Select, and what opens up here is the instrument. Now, in this case, this is a sampler. It's a drum sampler. It can actually be an anything sampler, but it's sort of meant to be a drum sampler. You have each one of these little cells contains a different sample or a different sound. So, for instance, if you want to audition them, and so forth, right? We want to create a hi-hat part, but I don't really see a closed hi-hat in here. So to change the sound, right, you just want to look at the top little section here. Let me zoom in. So this cell right here gives us all the information about this one particular sample. I can mute this sample so we don't hear it. I could also solo it so that it mutes everything else. We can decide which audio output we want to send it to. For the most part, the only thing that we need to do here is change which note we're using. or which instrument rather. And since I don't want an open hi-hat, we want a closed hi-hat, so we want more of a tick, 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 tick sound, right? I'm going to go to Acoustic Kit. I'm going to find hi-hats, and I'm just going to choose the first, I'm going to do closed tight HH, closed tight hi-hat. Let's hear that. Okay, it's not very loud. I'm just using my computer speaker, but that's the kind of sound that I want. Now, the other important information in this cell is this little piece here, A#1. What that means is that if you want to trigger or play this sound, right, whatever's loaded in here, in our case it's a hi-hat, then we must send the note number of A#1. We can change that to anything we want. We can send any note and have it play the hi-hat, but it's set up already at A#1. And truly, there's no real reason to change that. So we'll leave that here on A#1. And I'm now going to add some notes into my MIDI sequencer grid in order to record. Now, one thing that you need to do is figure out if you have A#1 on your particular keyboard. I will tell you, if you don't have a fairly full size keyboard, you don't have the first octave. There's a couple ways around this. You can hit, if you have an octave button, you can shift down to get to the A sharp, to the first octave. If you don't have that, then you can change the note in here to something, and let's say to be, I don't know, safe or easy, just say C4, because that's middle C. Everyone has a C4. So now, anytime that we send a the pitch of C, the MIDI pitch of C in the fourth octave, we're going to get that hi-hat sound. So now we're going to do some real-time recording. Before we do that, let's make sure we have everything set up right. So we're going to adjust the metronome. Right now, if you look at the top of the screen, this project is at 120 beats a minute. And we want this to be 90 beats a minute. So I'm going to just click on it, type in 90, and hit return. You'll notice that this little slider, let me zoom in again, you'll notice this little slider moves around a little bit, right? So if I take this back to 120, it's right in the middle, go back to 90, so you can change it here if you wanted to grab that. If you have a MIDI keyboard, you just need to find A#1, and on your keyboard anyway, and you'll be able to perform this part. If you don't want to use a MIDI keyboard or an external keyboard, or if you don't have one yet, or don't have one, you can go all the way up to the studio menu. In the top of that second section there, something called MIDI keys. When I open that, it is a little tool that converts your QWERTY keyboard into a musical keyboard. Now, because I want A#1, right, I know that I need to be in the first octave. So it's telling me which pitch of C is at the bottom here. That's octave C1. That's what we're looking at. And what means that A# is going to be represented by the U key. And again, it's not very loud, but I bet you I could crank this up a little bit. There you go. Okay, so now we have our keyboard set up, we're triggering the right sound, we have our track set up. Next thing we need to do is record. Before you start recording, you want to make sure your count off is turned on. So your count off, it's up here in the transport section, and it's always going to be this little piece under the record button. The count off is how much time you get at whatever tempo you have before it starts recording. Make sure your tempo is at 90 beats a minute and that your count off is turned on. And then all we're going to do is hit rewind, record, and when I hit record, we're going to hear 8 clicks. So 2 measures or 2 bars of clicks, and then it's going to start recording. I'm going to use those 2 bars to kind of sink into the tempo so that I can perform, right? Because I'm actually performing, you are actually performing this. Let me hit record. Okay, I recorded 8 notes. That's it. I just played 8. I'm going to double click that little region, and here are my 8 notes, right? That's step 1. Get those notes in there. Now, step 2 is, are they in the right place? Are they the right note, right? Something to know here, let me zoom back in, is when you look on the left, you want to see, or right, whatever, but you want to see your event list. If you don't see your event list here, go into this little menu and find it, right? And so this will be the event list for whatever track or whatever region we have selected. Now, if I had a whole track full of MIDI information and I select the track, I would see everything that's on the track. But because I only selected this one region, I'm only seeing what's in this one region. I only have info in this one region. Now, as we look at the event list, right, you will remember, I hope, that this is how we're counting time. So this is when this first event happened. Measure 1 or bar 1, beat 1, subdivision 31, and it's a note, and it's a pitch of B flat 1, which is the same as A sharp 1. Arrow pointing down means it's a note on message. The key was pressed down with a velocity of 98. And then it was held for some amount of time and then let go, right? So basic MIDI events. So the next thing that we need to do is we're going to put all of these in the right place in time. This is not the right place. So we want to evenly divide these so that they are a quarter or an eighth note apart, which means that all of these numbers should be about, actually they should be exactly 240 ticks apart. So the way we fix that is we can just double click in there, and that one is 0. Okay, next one is at 240, and then we want 0, 240, 0, 240. So you should only have, let me zoom back in, you should only have 2 per beat. So beat number 1 has something right on 1 and right in the middle at 240. 2 for 3s, 2 for 4s. So ultimately what you end up with is 8 notes. And if we were to play this, turn off that count off, so we don't need that. There we go. So we have our 8 eighth notes. The next thing that we need to do, after we've put them in time in the proper place, is we need to set up the appropriate note on velocity. Now, in this case, because I did this from the MIDI keys, the velocity was set at 98. The velocity that we want is 90. And what we're going to do here is, start by fixing that first one and just hit the down arrow. And that will take you to the next field. So 90, down arrow, 90. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to repeat the hi-hat notes. So we already created one measure. We want this to go for about 31 more measures, so I believe 32 total, something like that. And to do this, we could certainly highlight this. We could use the typical kind of copy and paste, and we can go and paste this out a bunch of times. All right, so the next thing we want to do is repeat this thing that we have here. And to do that, we're going to select just the region that we want. We're going to go to the Edit menu, and we're going to choose Repeat. Now it's going to ask us here, how many, do you want us to paste it? Do you want to merge it? Do you want to splice? These are all various ways of editing. I'm just going to leave everything alone, and I'm going to choose Repeat the selected data 29 times. So that should give me 29 repeats plus the original. It should give me 30 bars total. As soon as I click OK and I look down here, let's go back, and well, we're close. And you'll notice here when we pasted this, my time values are all sort of cattywampus again. And because they're all selected here, so we can use Command A or Control A and select all of them. And let's go ahead and just fix all of these at one time. So I've shown you how to go into the individual values here and change, but now let's look at quantizing. So quantizing just does a very similar thing. It does it automatically. When you quantize something, you're telling Performer, see if I can zoom in, you're telling Performer that you want to create a grid of some type of note. In this case, it's going to be an eighth note because that's what I played over here, were eighth notes. And we want to adjust every single note to fit on this grid of eighth notes. So it should only be at a grid, right? So if we do this, we just leave all these settings and just say apply. As I do this, watch these values over here, right? Everything changed. So now everything is an even distribution of eighth notes. But you'll find that there are some anomalies in here, right? Like this one, it seems like somehow an extra note got in there. And it might have just been kind of a goofy performance. And you'll notice, which it clearly was, and you'll notice this repeats because we just repeated this thing, that pattern, which means we repeated whatever incorrect thing that I did here 29 times. So you just kind of have to go through, find the notes that don't fit. If you had this problem, delete them. So you want a nice clean event list. When you're done with that, you now have 30 bars of hi-hat. Plug in some headphones or speakers, hit rewind, hit play, make sure it sounds like eighth notes, and then you're done.